A Capitol hearing turns into a battlefield when Jasmine Crockett uncovers Barron Trump's scheme to scrap the 22nd Amendment and grab the presidency for life. The stakes explode beyond politics. This is survival for American democracy. So when power and principle collide, who wins? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber was silent as the special constitutional hearing began, broadcast live to the entire nation. Millions of Americans watched, knowing this was not routine politics, but a battle over the foundation of their democracy. At the center table, Barron Trump leaned back, arms folded, his face curled into a mocking grin. He looked more like a prince on a throne than a witness under oath. Cameras zoomed in just as Jasmine Crockett entered her stride firm, her eyes unflinching, the weight of history behind her. Barron broke the tension with a cruel laugh. A third-rate lawyer from Dallas teaching me about the U.S. Constitution. You should go back to your poor little job as a public defender. The insult cracked through the room, drawing gasps and murmurs from every corner. He smirked, convinced he had humiliated her before the fight even began. His arrogance dripped into every word as if America's laws were nothing more than a game for him to bend. Jasmine didn't speak. She only smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile, and laid a thick folder of documents on the desk with a heavy thud. The sound echoed like a gavel striking doom. The moderator's voice trembled but carried, "Is this the moment America faces the plan to overthrow its democracy?" Every screen froze on Jasmine's steady stare. The war had begun. The tension in the chamber had already reached a breaking point when Jasmine Crockett stood. With deliberate calm, she reached into her folder and pulled out a thick stapled document. The rustle of paper echoed like thunder in the hushed hall. She held it high above her head so the cameras could capture every detail. This, she declared, her voice sharp as a blade, is a 14-page memorandum prepared by the law firm Stonebridge and Myers, commissioned in secret by Barron Trump himself. Gasps rippled through the audience. The cover was stamped in bold type: Memorandum, Proposed Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And at the very last page, heavy with ink and arrogance, sat the signature: Barron W. Trump. The memo went even further. In black and white, it laid out a direct proposal to abolish the 22nd Amendment. The very safeguard that limits the presidency to 2 terms, and replace it with language that would allow power to stretch indefinitely. Barron leaned back and erupted into cruel laughter. The sound was sharp, mocking, dripping with scorn. "You think a few photocopies can bring me down? Ridiculous." His words rang with contempt, daring the room to dismiss her evidence as a cheap trick. His allies forced thin smiles, trying to mimic his bravado, but the strain showed in their eyes. Barron tapped his fingers on the desk, wearing his smirk like a shield, as if the document were nothing more than a child's drawing. His voice was soaked in arrogance, and yet a flicker of unease betrayed him. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't waste breath trading insults. Instead, she clicked the remote in her hand. The chamber screens lit up instantly, blinding in their clarity. Projected across the hall was the email itself, the digital trail, undeniable and damning. The subject line glared: Constitutional Amendment Draft. Beneath it, the sentence that tore through the chamber like a gunshot: Draft of the Constitutional Amendment completed as you requested. The words were plain, clinical, devastating. No theatrics, no exaggeration, just evidence. The audience erupted in gas and murmurs. A wave of disbelief and outrage crashing against the marble walls. Senators craned their necks. Aides scrambled. Reporters scribbled frantically as if history itself were pouring through their pens. From the far side of the chamber, a conservative senator, loyal for decades to the Trump name, pushed himself to his feet, his face ashen, his voice broke heavy with horror. "My God, this is nothing short of a monarchy." The word detonated in the room. Monarchy? It clung to the air like smoke, suffocating, undeniable. The chamber exploded into chaos. Shouts overlapped. Gasps. Chairs scraped against the floor. The press surged forward. Barron's smirk faltered. His jaw stiffened. The color drained from his cheeks. For the first time, the mask of invincibility cracked. He reached for his glass of water, but his hand trembled so badly that he missed it on the first try. Cameras caught everything, the arrogance collapsing into panic. The prince who dreamed of a crown stripped bare under the weight of his own signature. The roar of the chamber had barely settled when the back doors creaked open. Heads turned, cameras swung, and a figure stepped into the spotlight. He was older now, hair graying at the edges, shoulders stooped by years of silence. The clerk announced him with crisp formality. Victor Hale, former senior advisor to the Trump family. The name fell like a stone into water. The reaction rippled instantly, gasps from the gallery, flashes from cameras, a sudden rise in the hum of whispers. Everyone in that room knew this man's face. He had been at the table, always near the power, always trusted. And now he was walking to the witness chair alone. Barron leaned forward, his lips curling into a sneer. He could not resist striking first, his voice dripping with mockery. "Ah," he said, letting the words drag out, the traitor himself. "Paid to put on a show, I see." The insult cut through the air like a blade, and a few of his allies laughed nervously, hoping their loyalty would be noticed. Barron leaned back again, folding his arms, certain that Hale's credibility would crumble before he even sat down. The smirk on his face was that of a man convinced betrayal had no weight against him. Victor Hale's hands trembled as he placed himself in the chair. He adjusted the microphone, his eyes darting across the chamber, then briefly to Jasmine. She gave a single nod, firm and steady, urging him on without a word. Hale inhaled sharply, the sound of a man carrying a burden that had grown too heavy. His voice cracked, at first soft and unsteady, but each syllable grew sharper as the truth clawed its way out. "I was there," he began, his fingers clutching the edge of the desk at Mar-a-Lago. "I sat in the room when Barron Trump spoke with his lawyers, and I heard him say word for word that Trump would never step down, that their family would rule forever." The room shifted, chairs creaked, breaths caught. Hale's hand slipped into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small ordinary flash drive. He held it up, his knuckles pale from the strain of his grip. "Here," he said, his voice steadier now as the recording. The sentence itself was like a lightning strike. The chamber filled with gasps. Reporters nearly toppling over their laptops to capture the revelation. Jasmine remained still, her eyes locked on Barron, waiting for the weight of truth to fall. Hale slid the USB across the desk to the technician. The click of it entering the system echoed like a gun cocking. Then the speakers filled with sound. Barron's voice, unmistakable, smooth, arrogant, recorded without a trace of hesitation. "Trump will rule forever. I will succeed my father." The words boomed undeniable, carrying every ounce of certainty from the night they were spoken. They hung over the chamber like smoke, poisonous and impossible to ignore. The room went wild. Gasps, murmurs, shouts colliding into a storm. Faces turned pale, jaws, dropped hands rose instinctively to mouse. Even those who had defended Barron shifted uncomfortably in their seats, no longer able to shield themselves from the raw clarity of his ambition. Barron shot up from his chair, his voice cracking with fury. "That's out of context," he screamed, slamming his palm against the desk. "I was joking. I was making a joke." His shout rang desperate, shrill, the kind of protest that only made guilt louder. His face flushed red, sweat glistening under the lights as he pointed a shaking finger toward Hale. "This is nothing but a setup. Lies, all of it." His performance was frantic, unconvincing, a man clawing at air while the ground collapsed beneath him. The cameras captured every twitch, every vein, every flash of panic that contradicted the smirk he wore minutes before. But the chamber was no longer his. The crowd erupted, their reaction deafening. Reporters shouted over one another, aides scrambled for his allies, forced thin smiles, trying to mimic his bravado, but the strain showed in their eyes. Barron tapped his fingers on the desk, wearing his smirk like a shield, as if the document were nothing more than a child's drawing. His voice was soaked in arrogance, and yet a flicker of unease betrayed him. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't waste breath trading insults. Instead, she clicked the remote in her hand. The chamber screens lit up instantly, blinding in their clarity. Projected across the hall was the email itself, the digital trail, undeniable and damning. The subject line glared, Constitutional Amendment Draft. Beneath it, the sentence that tore through the chamber like a gunshot. Draft of the Constitutional Amendment completed as you requested. The words were plain, clinical, devastating. No theatrics, no exaggeration, just evidence. The audience erupted in gas and murmurs. A wave of disbelief and outrage crashing against the marble walls. Senators craned their necks. Aides scrambled. Reporters scribbled frantically as if history itself were pouring through their pens. From the far side of the chamber, a conservative senator, loyal for decades to the Trump name, pushed himself to his feet, his face ashen, his voice broke heavy with horror. My God, this is nothing short of a monarchy. The word detonated in the room. Monarchy? It clung to the air like smoke, suffocating, undeniable. The chamber exploded into chaos. Shouts overlapped. Gasps. Chairs scraped against the floor. The press surged forward. Barron's smirk faltered. His jaw stiffened. The color drained from his cheeks. For the first time, the mask of invincibility cracked. He reached for his glass of water, but his hand trembled so badly that he missed it on the first try. Cameras caught everything, the arrogance collapsing into panic. The prince who dreamed of a crown stripped bare under the weight of his own signature. The roar of the chamber had barely settled when the back doors creaked open. Heads turned, cameras swung, and a figure stepped into the spotlight. He was older now, hair graying at the edges, shoulders stooped by years of silence. The clerk announced him with crisp formality. Victor Hale, former senior advisor to the Trump family. The name fell like a stone into water. The reaction rippled instantly, gasps from the gallery, flashes from cameras, a sudden rise in the hum of whispers. Everyone in that room knew this man's face. He had been at the table, always near the power, always trusted. And now he was walking to the witness chair alone. Barron leaned forward, his lips curling into a sneer. He could not resist striking first, his voice dripping with mockery. Ah, he said, letting the words drag out, the traitor himself. Paid to put on a show, I see. The insult cut through the air like a blade, and a few of his allies laughed nervously, hoping their loyalty would be. Barron's face held that easy look of someone raised to believe rules were doors for him alone. He rolled his shoulders back and let the smirk return, daring her to argue with a century of swagger. The words hung there neat and polished, a slogan he expected would float above the fact she had just read. Jasmine answered without moving from the podium. Her hand came down hard on the wood, a single strike that snapped the room to attention. She looked straight at Barron and spoke so cleanly, there was no place for his words to hide. Change must serve the people, not the throne of your family. The line cut through the microphones and into the airplane, and sharp with nothing extra to soften it. The Constitution lay open beside her knuckles, the page trembling slightly in the draft that followed her blow. No one moved. Even pens paused above notepads as if the ink itself were waiting to see whether the document or the dynasty would speak next. The moment hung there tight as wire, unbroken. The chamber was still vibrating from Jasmine's last strike when she reached once more into her folder. This time she pulled out a fresh stack of papers clipped together, heavier, thicker, stamped with bank logos across the top. The sound of the pages hitting the desk was sharp, deliberate, like the crack of a whip. She raised the packet high enough for the cameras to catch and spoke with calm precision. What you saw before was ambition written in words. What I hold now is ambition bought in cash. Swiss bank records. 45 million US funneled through Cayman Islands accounts, then directed straight into the hands of the lobbying firm Liberty Advancement Group. Their mandate to push for one thing and one thing only, the removal of the 22nd Amendment. The words dropped like lead weights. Screens lit up with the documents. Every line of transaction glowing under the harsh lights. Gasps rolled through the chamber. The numbers were too clean, too obvious. Account numbers, dates, signatures, all lined up with deadly precision. On one page, the entry was crystal clear. Transfer $45,000 from Barron Trump Holding Zurich to Liberty Advancement Group Cayman Islands. The evidence was impossible to spin away. Reporters scrambled over each other, shouting their pens, scratching furiously while senators twisted in their seats. Some clutching the desks in disbelief. The gallery erupted with murmurs, a chorus of outrage that rose like thunder. For the first time. It wasn't just theory. It was money raw. Undeniable dirty money spelled out in black and white. Barron leaned back and instead of retreating, he smirked wider. His laugh cut through the uproar, smug and venomous. "You don't understand the bigger game," he sneered, his voice dripping contempt. "This is global strategy, not a few spare numbers on a page. While you waste your breath, real players shape the world. That's what this is, strategy, not scandal." He spoke as if the chamber itself were beneath him, as if senators and citizens were pawns too simple to grasp what power really meant. His allies tried to chuckle with him, but their faces betrayed unease, their laughter dying quick in their throats. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't smile. She didn't even glance down at her papers. She pressed both hands on the desk and leaned forward, her voice striking with the force of a hammer. "No," she said, every syllable echoing across the marble. "This isn't strategy. This is proof you tried to buy the American Constitution. This is proof you paid to rig the guardrails of democracy. Not because you earned it, not because the people asked for it, but because you thought money could crown you king." The chamber stilled as her words hit. Every camera zoomed tighter on her face, catching the fire in her eyes. She turned another page of the records, and the big screens showed the most damaging proof yet. At the top was the logo of Liberty Advancement Group, the lobbying firm Barron had secretly paid. At the bottom was the signature of their chief lobbyist. In bold letters, one line stood out like a wound. Primary target repeal of the 22nd Amendment. Jasmine raised her hand and pointed straight at it. Her voice cut like steel. "This is not a mistake. This is not a joke. This is a purchase order for power. Signed, sealed, and delivered with your money, Mr. Trump." The room shook with gas louder than before. Senators leaned forward in disbelief. Aides rushed to double-check the documents, and the evidence spoke for itself. Chaos broke loose. Reporters shouted questions over one another, cameras flashing non-stop. Some senators slammed their fists on the table in anger, while others hid their faces in shame. From the gallery above, the murmurs turned into shouts. Anger, shock, pure outrage filling the air. Outside, social media exploded as hashtags lit up and spread like wildfire. But inside the spotlight locked onto one man. Barron's famous smirk finally cracked. His fingers tapped nervously against the desk. Too fast, too loud. His eyes darted toward his lawyers, but they kept their heads down, refusing to meet his gaze. Jasmine's voice cut through the storm louder than everything else. Words, witnesses, recordings, and now money. Every single piece of this puzzle points to you. Every page, every number, every dollar proves one thing. You tried to buy your way past the Constitution. You tried to buy the soul of this country. With a sharp motion, she slammed the packet of bank records back onto the desk. The sound echoed like a gavel striking judgment. And America deserves to see exactly what that looks like. The case was complete. The secret memo, the recording of Barron's voice, the witness testimony, and now the money, $45 million traced straight back to him. No excuses left. No spin could erase it. Barron Trump, once untouchable, sat cornered under the weight of his own signature, his own words, and his own fortune. The chamber was already boiling with chaos from the money trail, but Barron could feel the walls closing in. His smirk had vanished, his hands shook, and every eye in the room was locked on him. The cameras caught the sweat collecting on his forehead, the tight pull of his jaw, the way his fingers clawed at the desk. For a moment, he tried to hide behind silence, but silence gave him no shield. And so he lashed out. His voice tore through the room louder than before, harsh and venomous. "You're nothing," he spat, pointing straight at Jasmine. "You're just another colored pawn put here to play hero. A sideshow, nothing more." The word struck the chamber like a bomb. Gas rose instantly sharp and horrified, echoing from every corner. Reporters froze mid-sentence, their pens hanging above their pads. Senators stiffened in their chairs, some turning away, others staring in open disbelief. The gallery fell completely silent, mouths hanging open at the naked venom dripping from Barron's voice. It was no longer just arrogance or ambition. It was raw contempt, stripped of any disguise, a slur hurled in desperation. The insult hung heavy in the air, ugly and undeniable, playing out live on every television across America. Jasmine closed her eyes, steadying herself against the sting. She inhaled slowly, deeply, as if drawing in the strength of generations who had fought this battle long before her. For a heartbeat, the chamber was quiet, except for the faint buzz of the lights and the pounding of hearts. When she opened her eyes, there was no anger on her face, only fire. Her voice came low, at first deliberate, every word landing like iron. "You just proved," she said, lifting her gaze to meet his, without flinching, exactly why this nation must protect the Constitution from those who despise it most. The chamber erupted. Applause broke out like an explosion, thunder rolling against marble and steel. Senators slammed their hands against their desks, some rising to their feet in a spontaneous ovation. The gallery joined in clapping and shouting, the sound surging like a wave crashing against the walls. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras snapping furiously, live stream feeds lighting up across the country. The applause wasn't polite or measured. It was raw, furious, defiant. The kind of sound that carried history in its echo outside the news cycle, ignited in real time. Phones buzzed as millions tuned into the live stream comment sections, flooding with disbelief and anger at Barron's words mixed with awe at Jasmine's calm, devastating response. Hashtags shot up the charts within minutes, feeds exploding with clips replaying the moment again and again. Anchors interrupted broadcast to announce what had just been said on the House floor. America was watching and America was choosing. Inside the chamber, the sound kept building. Barron sat stiff, his lips pressed tight, eyes darting to his aides who looked as pale as ghosts. He had tried to reduce Jasmine to a caricature, tried to crush her with insult and venom, but it had backfired with catastrophic force. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the flicker of regret. The shadow of panic, the unmistakable realization that his words had condemned him more than any document or bank record ever could. Jasmine remained at the center, unmoved by the storm, her hands resting firmly on the desk. She had not raised her voice. She had not shouted him down. And yet, she had struck harder than any gavel. Her words lingered, replaying themselves in the silence between applause. A reminder that this was bigger than one man, bigger than one family, bigger than the sneer of a would-be heir. This was about the soul of the Republic. And in that moment, everyone watching knew it. The ovation surged again, rolling through the chamber with renewed force. As if the people themselves were speaking through every clap, every shout, every rising chant, the reporters rushed out into the hall, broadcasting live updates, their voices shaking with adrenaline. Live stream numbers soared into the millions, clips already spreading faster than any campaign ad ever could. The hearing was no longer just a hearing. It had become a battlefield of truth, and Jasmine Crockett had just landed the strike that turned the tide. As the ovation still echoed from the chamber, the coverage outside caught fire in seconds. Producers barked orders. Anchors cut into programming and red banners raced across the bottom of screens. Within minutes, front pages and homepages rolled out the same searing line, Barron Trump Law for the Strong. The headline landed like a hammer, short, brutal, impossible to dodge. Editors stitched the insult, the memo, and the money trail into a single reel that no viewer could ignore. In control rooms from New York to Phoenix, directors called for split screens, replay angles, push alerts, and live countdowns to next update. The clip of Barron's slur and sneer shot across the internet like a spark in dry brush. It autoplayed on timelines, looped on cable chairins, and pinged phones in kitchens, cabs, and hospital waiting rooms. Captions stamped the moment in plain type so no one could pretend they misheard. Reaction videos multiplied, each one replaying the words and the look on his face at the exact second the crowd recoiled. By lunchtime, the clip had become a storm cell of outrage, spiraling through every platform, pulling in millions with each refresh. By nightfall, it was the only thing most people talked about, replayed at dinner tables like a cautionary tale. Older voters took it personally and said so out loud. On talk radio, a Vietnam veteran called in and said, "This feels like the Watergate moment of the 21st century." And the switchboard lit up. A retired civics teacher told a local station that rules exist to stop exactly this kind of grab for power. At a senior center, a woman in her 70s tapped her cane and said that guardrails are made for days like this. Church groups texted prayer chains that doubled as organizing threads for town halls and letter drives. In diners and union halls, people leaned over coffee and repeated the headline as if testing its weight, then nodded in grim agreement. Inside the party, the fallout was immediate and ugly. Republican staffers drafted statements, deleted them, and drafted again as donors called and county chairs demanded distance. A handful of senior lawmakers walked to cameras and said on record that Barron's words were unacceptable and beneath the party. Others tried to wait it out and looked smaller by the hour, ducking questions in hallways and refusing to meet reporters' eyes. A committee chair announced hearings on the lobbying pipeline and said no one was above the Constitution, not even a famous name. By evening, the divide was public loyalty to a name or loyalty to the limits that name wanted to erase, and every silence sounded like consent. Meanwhile, Jasmine became the face of the moment, whether she asked for it or not. Editorials ran side by side, calling her the guardian of the Republic, and panels replayed her lines in slow motion like a last-second block in a championship game. Clips showed her steady hands on the desk, then cut to the Constitution page she had read aloud, the camera lingering on the words. She trended not for a slogan, but for a sentence that defended the guardrails in plain English. At city halls and campuses, invitations piled up for forums on the 22nd Amendment and the boundaries of executive power with her name at the top line. On the courthouse steps after sundown, supporters held up pocket constitutions and phone screens, chanting the headline until it felt like a promise kept. Networks rolled out special reports with live tickers counting views, shares and calls to congressional offices. Fact-checkers posted side-by-side receipts, the memo, the email, the bank transfers, while ad buyers quietly paused spots tied to Barron's tour. State party chairs issued tour statements and some rescinded endorsements. Call-in lines jammed as grandparents read the headline back verbatim and asked what they could do to defend the term limits they taught their kids. On newsstands, mock-ups showed Jasmine beneath the caption, "The Guardian of the Republic," while lower thirds kept repeating Barron Trump Law for the Strong. By midnight, the story hardened into a frame. Anyone could carry a slur, a plan, the money, and a woman standing between a name and the guardrails. As the headlines hardened and the broadcast loops kept spinning, the streets answered. Neighbors poured out of offices, porches, and buses with cardboard signs and marker ink still wet. The first chant rose fast and clean. "The Constitution is not for sale." It moved like a drum beat down the block, simple enough for anyone to join. Car horns kept time and shop windows reflected a river of faces. From stoops and crosswalks, people pointed at the screens and then at their signs, deciding the camera belonged to them. Now the city felt its pulse return in every determined step. Tonight in Washington, they gathered at the steps and filled the plaza until the marble echoed. Parents walked beside retirees in ball caps and medals, and nurses in scrubs marched next to mechanics with oil on their sleeves. A megaphone passed from hand to hand, voices shaky at first then steady. The Constitution is not for sale. The words bounced off columns and flags, each pass making them louder. A boy on his father's shoulders repeated them like a lesson while cameras panned across the faces as if memorizing them for the nation's album. A drummer set cadence at the curb. Texas moved next, hot, loud, and unafraid. In Austin, students flowed down Congress Avenue behind a veteran in a wheelchair carrying a folded flag across his lap. In Houston, refinery workers linked arms with teachers and a church choir, a wall of hands stretching across the front row. Outside the Dallas courthouse, a woman lifted a sign and shouted, "The Constitution is not for sale." The crowd answered in one voice that rattled windows. Reporters climbed planters to film the surge, and a helicopter traced the route like a highlighter scrawling across the city's grid. Heat shimmered above waving flags. Ohio turned lunch hour into a civics lesson you could feel underfoot. In Columbus, towers emptied onto the square until the steps looked like a grandstand. A retired sergeant stepped to a microphone and spoke without notes. "We bled to defend the Constitution that Barron wants to abolish." The veterans along the rail didn't clap at first. They stood straight, eyes wet. Then the applause rolled forward like thunder. In Cleveland and Cincinnati, courthouse lawns filled with signs while church bells marked the hour like a metronome for the marching feet. Workers ate standing, nodding between bites and cheers there. Florida's coast answered as the sun slid lower and the air finally cooled. In Miami, families marched along Biscayne Boulevard while a Cuban grandmother gripped a bullhorn like a torch. The Constitution is not for sale. People on balconies echoed her until the chant sounded like surf pounding sea walls. In Tampa, a Marine and dress blues held up a friend's photo and told a local camera, "We bled to defend the Constitution that Barron wants to abolish." The clip hit phones within minutes, and strangers lifted him onto their shoulders as if carrying a banner with a beating heart tonight. The signs were blunt because the point was blunt. Some showed the number 22 inside a red circle. Others printed limits in black paint thick as tar. A teenager wrote "Hands off 22" across a poster that once covered a science project. 2 terms, a man said to nobody and everybody, tapping his cardboard with one finger. That's the line. People were not arguing legal theory. They were defending a guardrail they could explain in a sentence. And the chant kept moving tired legs forward. Neon vests guided lanes and stroller wheels clicked like metronomes between boot steps all night. Veterans formed ranks at the front, flags pulled tight against the wind. Some wore unit shirts faded to soft cotton. Others wore hats that said where they had served. A woman with silver hair held a pocket Constitution and a sign that read simply, "I swore an oath." Asked what she meant, she pointed to the preamble and said, "The oath still binds." Then she faced the dome and whispered, "The Constitution is not for sale," as if speaking to names cut in stone. Around her hands rose in quiet salute. While bugle notes played from a phone speaker nearby, police kept to the edges holding traffic and handing out water without pushing anyone back. A pizza shop in Dayton taped a note to its window, "Free slices with protest sign." In Tallahassee, a brass band fell into step behind the marchers and looped the same 4 bars until smiles spread. In El Paso, shopkeepers rolled coolers to the curb and poured paper cups for strangers. Routes curved toward parks and courthouse lawns where portable speakers stood on milk crates. Every stop ended the same way: a chorus shouted the line again, and a cheer chased it down the block. As daylight thinned, rallies replaced marches and stages rose from flatbed trucks. In Arlington, a woman who had never touched a microphone read the 22nd Amendment aloud, hands shaking but steady. The crowd answered like a choir answering a soloist. In Toledo, a grandfather said his father came home from World War II with a limp and a conviction that no leader should sit forever. Heads nodded and rose because the story sounded like home. Camera cranes swung for wide shots while drone lights blinked above and the chant stitched the scenes into one picture. Voters registered at folding tables. The more the crowds grew, the less old labels mattered, and everyone knew it. A man in a blue shirt stood beside a woman in a red hat, and no one asked for registration cards. An electrician held a shipping box sign that said, "Hands off 22" and laughed when a stranger tried to trade for it. A librarian handed out pocket constitutions and ran out in half an hour. On the evening news, a reporter said what the streets already understood. This is not partisan anymore. It is a life-or-death fight for democracy. Heads lifted as if hearing a siren. The protests had barely begun to quiet when the political machinery of Washington roared into motion. In the Capitol dome, the speaker's voice thundered through microphones as he announced a rare move. The House of Representatives will open a special investigation into the actions of Barron Trump. Reporters swarmed the rotunda, shouting questions over one another as the words flashed on ticker tapes across the country. A special committee was formed within hours packed with constitutional scholars, senior lawmakers, and even retired judges. They called it an extraordinary inquiry, a phrase not heard since Watergate. Staffers rushed down marble corridors with armfuls of binders, the echo of their footsteps chasing them into late-night sessions. The sense was clear. America wasn't just handling a scandal. It was handling a crisis of survival. The Department of Justice stepped in next. Cameras camped outside its headquarters as the Attorney General stepped to a podium, hands gripping the edges tight. His voice carried the weight of the Republic. "We are reviewing evidence for possible charges of conspiracy against the Constitution. And yes, treason is among them." The word detonated like a shell. Treason. It ripped across every front page, scrolled endlessly on Sharon's, and exploded on social media feeds. Analysts debated it non-stop, citing statutes, precedents, and risks. People argued in diners and churches whether Barron's push to buy the repeal of the 22nd Amendment was just corruption or an attempt to dismantle democracy itself. And the DOJ's promise hung over it all like a sword. In classrooms, the scandal became a lesson before the ink on headlines had dried. Universities from Georgetown to Berkeley rewrote their syllabi overnight. Professors walked into lecture halls carrying fresh clippings and USB drives loaded with news clips. This one political science professor declared holding up the memo with Barron's signature is a living example of how democracies can tip toward dictatorship. Students scribbled notes as he replayed the footage of Jasmine Crockett standing tall with the Constitution in her hands. In another hall, a constitutional law class broke into debate after watching Barron laugh and sneer at Amendment 22. "This isn't just theory anymore," a professor told her students. "It's case law in real time." Libraries pulled volumes on FDR's 4 terms, and the post-war push for term limits, reshelving them next to articles on Barron Trump's alleged scheme. History was alive, and it felt electric. The impact split America straight down the middle. In town halls, some rose to call Jasmine Crockett the defender of the Republic and the Constitution's champion. Posters and murals appeared with her face next to the words "Guardian of the Republic." Editorials praised her restraint under fire, especially after Barron had tried to humiliate her with a racist taunt. On late-night shows, comedians turned her response, "This is not a throne. This is a republic," into a battle cry. But across darker corners of the internet, extremist voices fanned a different flame. They called Barron the heir to a Trump dynasty. Videos circulated with dramatic music cutting between his smirking defiance and images of his father on campaign stages. At rallies in rural counties, signs read, "Forever Trump and monarchy over chaos," waved by those who saw dynasty as destiny. Two narratives were colliding in the same country, and the collision felt violent. Gallup released numbers that only added fuel to the storm. Their survey splashed across every network. 68% of Americans opposed Barron Trump's attempt to alter the Constitution. The bar graph painted a devastating picture. Support for Jasmine surged not just among Democrats, but among independents, veterans, and even a chunk of Republicans who recoiled at the idea of hereditary politics. Talk radio buzzed with callers repeating the same line. 2 terms, no exceptions. A retired steel worker in Pennsylvania told his local station, "This isn't about left or right. This is about keeping the line where the founders drew it." The data was clear. Nearly 7 out of 10 Americans wanted Barron stopped, and that number turned every silence in the GOP into a liability. Meanwhile, television could not get enough of the moment that defined it all. Again and again, networks replayed the split-screen footage. Jasmine Crockett reading the 22nd Amendment in her calm, deliberate voice. "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice." And then Barron bursting into laughter, sneering, "Law is meant to be rewritten by the strong. We are Trump. We do not need law." Producers looped it hourly. Analysts dissected every frame. And anchors let the silence after his words hang heavy. Late-night news panels asked, was this the instant Barron destroyed his own future? Clips of Jasmine's fiery rebuttal. "This is not a throne. This is a republic" went viral as ringtone audio, TikTok remixes, and protest chants. The footage became a cultural scar replayed until it seared itself into a memory. Across the Capitol, the investigation accelerated. Subpoenas flew to Barron's associates demanding bank records and emails. Liberty Advancement Group, the lobbying firm caught in the money trail, saw its offices raided by federal agents. Footage of boxes carried out into black vans ran on loop beside commentary about the fall of once powerful influence networks. Former staffers flipped offering testimony in exchange for immunity. The drip of new revelations became daily headlines, encrypted chats, offshore accounts, even drafts of speeches laying out how to sell a Trump dynasty to the public. The narrative was relentless and every drop made Barron's circle smaller. On the other side, Jasmine's stature only grew. Her speeches were rebroadcast in prime time, her calm stare replayed in campaign ads for candidates across the country. Students wore T-shirts quoting her line about the Constitution not being for sale. Editorial cartoons sketched her as a flame keeping the torch of democracy lit. In Dallas, a mural went up on the side of a courthouse. Jasmine holding the Constitution aloft, her other hand slamming down on a desk. Barron's smirk fading into the shadows behind her. The image was shared millions of times. A piece of street art turned national symbol overnight. Still, the divide hardened. Extremist rallies gained coverage. Their chants of Trump forever, echoing against Jasmine's hands-off 22. In some towns, tensions flared between protesters and counter-protesters. Each side holding signs that mirrored the other's fury. Yet surveys continued to show Jasmine holding the ground, her coalition stretching wider than Barron's. The nation was split, but the math told the story: nearly 7 in 10 had chosen the guardrails over dynasty. And every replay of the footage, every headline about treason, every university lecture made that choice sharper. Back in Congress, the hearings became must-see TV. Millions tuned in daily to watch scholars explain why the 22nd Amendment mattered. Veterans testify about bleeding for it, and aides described the pressure Barron had applied to buy it away. At one hearing, a professor summed it up bluntly. "What we are watching is not partisanship. It is the line between democracy and monarchy." The quote splashed across newspapers and trended on Twitter within minutes. Nightly news rolled it under images of Jasmine nodding silently, her hand resting on the Constitution she had carried into the chamber. The DOJ's shadow never left. Pundits speculated endlessly about whether charges of treason could stick. Some argued it was too strong. Others said nothing less would meet the gravity of trying to buy term limits out of existence. Barron's legal team spun furiously, calling it political persecution. But their sound bites shrank next to the tidal wave of coverage replaying his laugh at the Constitution. Every attempt at defense only magnified the damning footage. The court of public opinion was already rendering judgment, and polls showed it daily. In homes across America, the story no longer felt like news. It felt like a national trial of conscience. Parents explained to children why presidents could only serve 2 terms. Veterans sat with grandkids pointing at the TV and saying, "This is why we fought." College students debated dynasties and republics in cafeterias, their phones buzzing with clips. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett stood at the center, not by choice, but by force of history, the woman who held the line when a dynasty tried to cross it. The Capitol chamber was packed tighter than it had been at any point in the scandal. For weeks, the hearings had played out like episodes in a national drama, but this was the finale. Reporters filled every seat in the press gallery. Their cameras locked in recording, the committee members filed in slowly, their faces lined with the weight of history. Everyone knew today would decide whether the investigation ended in smoke or whether Barron Trump's name would forever be bound to an attempted betrayal of the Constitution. Barron sat slumped at the witness table. Gone was the cocky smirk, the finger-drumming arrogance, the casual shrug that had carried him through the early days of testimony. His shoulders sagged, his face pale under the bright lights. For the first time since the hearings began, he looked less like an heir and more like a man cornered by his own shadow. To his left, his lead attorney whispered frantically, sliding papers across the desk. But the lawyer's voice cracked with exhaustion, and his eyes betrayed defeat. They had no more defenses, no more excuses, no more spin. The committee chair rapped the gavel and called the session to order. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air vents. A senior investigator rose and began to summarize weeks of evidence, the 14-page memo with Barron's signature proposing the repeal of the 22nd Amendment. The damning email trail, the Swiss bank transfers funneled through the Cayman Islands to Liberty Advancement Group, the recordings of Barron's voice at Mar-a-Lago promising Trump will rule forever. I will succeed my father. Each piece had been shocking on its own. Together they painted a single unbroken chain. As the words echoed, Barron sank lower in his chair. His lawyer shifted, adjusting his tie, but offered no objection. The silence from that side of the table was its own confession. Every time the evidence replayed on the screens, the air thickened. Senators leaned forward, their eyes hard. Staffers scribbled notes in frantic shorthand. The nation watching on television could sense it, too. The case was closed before the gavel fell. Then came the final words from the committee. The chair leaned into the microphone, her voice steady and solemn. This body concludes that there is sufficient evidence of violations of federal law. The acts under review constitute an attempt to subvert constitutional order and merit referral to the Department of Justice. The statement was calm, clinical, but its meaning was seismic. Subvert constitutional order, referral to DOJ. The weight of the conclusion sent a shudder through the chamber. History had just been written in real time. The silence was shattered by the clamor of reporters shouting into phones, anchors breaking in live headlines flashing across screens. Barron's attorney buried his face in his hands, the very image of surrender. Barron himself sat frozen, staring straight ahead as if refusing to hear the words. The young heir who once laughed off the Constitution now looked like a ghost haunted by its judgment. The cameras caught every twitch of his jaw, every flicker of panic in his eyes, every ounce of collapse that silence could not hide. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett rose from her seat. She did not hurry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood turned to face the camera lenses trained on her and spoke with a calm that cuts sharper than any shout. People can mock me, she said, her tone steady as stone. They can sneer at my work or at the color of my skin. They can laugh at where I come from or the job I once had. But what they cannot ever do, what no one is permitted to do, is treat the Constitution with contempt. Because the Constitution is not paper. The Constitution is the people. Her words landed like a cannon blast. The chamber stunned a second earlier erupted into sound. Every senator rose to their feet. Applause rolling like thunder against marble. The gallery above joined in clapping until the rafters shook. Even reporters bound by the rules of detachment could not help but stand their hands striking in unison with the roar. It was not just applause. It was the sound of a nation exhaling, of people recognizing the line that had held. Barron sat motionless, dwarfed by the ovation as the cameras cut back and forth between his vacant stare and Jasmine's unshakable presence. She had delivered the final strike without anger, without venom, only truth. And that truth was impossible to spin. For weeks, he had laughed, sneered, insulted, mocked. Now he sat in silence while the Republic applauded the woman who stood against him. The applause carried into the hallways, spilling out the doors where reporters dashed to file their stories. Within minutes, news alerts lit up phones across America. Committee finds evidence of federal crimes. Jasmine Crockett declares, Constitution is the people. Clips of her final words flooded television and social media. Networks interrupted primetime programming to replay the moment in full. On screens in living rooms, airports, and subway cars, the scene looped endlessly. Jasmine's calm gaze, her hand resting on the Constitution, her voice saying, "The Constitution is the people." Then came the numbers that proved the scope. Within the first 24 hours, the video racked up 60 million views online. By 48 hours, it crossed 90 million. And at 72 hours, the counter rolled past 120 million, the most watched political clip in the history of YouTube. Comment sections overflowed with quotes, hashtags, and tributes. Memes turned Jasmine's words into banners, phone wallpapers, and protest signs. Young activists shared it on TikTok, retirees replayed it on Facebook. It crossed generations, regions, and parties. For 3 days, every headline revolved around one woman's voice against one man's contempt. Crockett draws the line. The Constitution is the people. From mockery to judgment, editorial boards compared the clip to the Watergate hearings, calling it the turning point of a century. Morning shows replayed it with tears in their anchors' eyes. Even late-night comedians, usually armed with punchlines, aired the clip in silence before adding only one line. That's how you defend a republic. And in the chamber where it had all begun, the echo of applause still lingered. The sound of history did not fade easily. The applause still trembled in the rafters when the room fell into a steady hush like a tide pulling back before another wave. Cameras steadied, pens hovered, and faces turned to the only voice that mattered now. Jasmine did not raise her hands or search for a flourish. She met the lenses the way a lighthouse meets the dark. Her breath was even, her posture unbroken, and the Constitution rested near her elbow like a living witness. The transition from verdict to meaning was a single step, and she took it. My final message is simple. She said, each word chosen like a tool that fits the hand. American democracy survives because of people who dare to stand up when it is threatened. She let the line stand unadorned the way a flag stands on its pole. It is not saved by marble or microphones or clever speeches. It is saved by citizens who decide that silence is too costly. She glanced down at the parchment, then back through the glass to everyone watching at home. If you want to know who those people are, she continued, look in a mirror before dawn on the day you were afraid and showed up anyway. She spoke in plain notes like a bell RGN, once and true. They are the ones who ask a hard question when the room wants lies. They are the ones who stay after the meeting to count the ballots. They are the ones who sign their names under a statement they know will draw heat. Her voice did not chase applause. It shaped resolve. American democracy survives because of people who dare to stand up when it is threatened. She repeated without tilt or echo. That does not mean a person is fearless. It means they feel the fear and still stand. She paced one measured step and returned, anchor steady. They stand when the crowd is loud and also when the hallway's empty. They stand when the threat wears a crown and also when it wears a smile. The sentence settled like a weight that felt strangely like relief. She looked toward the gallery and then to the cameras again, her tone warm but unflinching. The Constitution is not a spell that works by itself, she said. It breathes because you breathe. It promises because you promise. It holds because you hold. She tapped the open page with a fingertip, not as a flourish, but as a grounding touch. And when someone aims to twist it into a throne, the answer is ordinary people doing an extraordinary thing standing up. There is a rumor that power protects itself, she said, her cadence level. Mostly it does because people grow tired and let it. She didn't shout the challenge. She laid it out like a map. But when neighbors decide to speak, when workers decide to organize, when veterans decide to remind us what they swore to defend, a different rumor spreads, the rumor that the people remember who they are. She nodded slightly as if marking a point on a chart. That is when a republic acts like a republic. American democracy survives because of people who dare to stand up when it is threatened, she said again, keeping the line as clean as a blade. Standing up can be a whisper that stops a lie, or a hand that opens a door, or a vote cast when no one thought you would show. Her images stayed close to daily life, never floating above it. It can be a question spoken into a microphone, or a question held across the dinner table. It can be a refusal to laugh at contempt. She let the room hear itself consenting to the meaning. She did not list heroes. She drew circles around the ordinary. A teacher who teaches the 2-term limit like it matters, she said. A nurse who writes a letter on her lunch break. A small business owner who tells a donor no when the price is the truth. The examples landed like footsteps on a staircase. A precinct captain who counts twice and signs once. A neighbor who says the chant out loud when others are waiting to see if it is safe. She breathed once, slow and steady, and went on. Some will say this is only politics, she said, palm open, inviting the objection and answering it. But politics ends at the ballot. A republic begins at the boundary of your courage. She kept her words tight, never straying. The guardrails do not exist because we love rules. They exist because we love people more than the rush of a single name. Her tone was even, never scolding, grounded like a carpenter's level. That is why limits feel like freedom when a throne is knocking. She let the Constitution rest beneath her hand like a living thing and threaded the line through it once more. American democracy survives because of people who dare to stand up when it is threatened. The repetition came without drama, as if she were engraving it letter by letter. If you are waiting for permission, this is it. If you are waiting for a sign, this is it. If you are waiting for a leader, look around. Leaders often look like neighbors with steady voices. The cameras did not blink. Neither did she. The ones who stand are not always loud, she said. Sometimes they are the last to leave the room. The first to arrive, the ones who keep the keys and turn on the lights. She offered no chorus, no swell, only clarity. They fix the small things that make the big things possible. They choose duty over drama. They will never trend, but the republic trends because of them. Her breath stayed calm and the message kept its shape. She turned slightly enough to include the people in the room and the people beyond it in the same arc. Do not let anyone tell you this work is for someone else. She said, the Constitution is not a spectator sport. It is a contact sport for the conscience. The line did not bite. It built. You do not have to carry it alone. You only have to carry your corner and refuse to drop it when someone pushes. She raised her chin a fraction, a physical period on the sentence. Remember the sentence, she said, and spoke it once more as if handing it over. American democracy survives because of people who dare to stand up when it is threatened. The chamber did not move, as if the air itself were holding the words in place. Write it, say it, teach it. She did not soften or sharpen. She stayed true. And when the day comes that the threat smiles and tells you it is nothing, stand anyway. Her final lines gathered all the threads without tying them into anything beyond the moment. If you can speak, speak, she said. If you can listen, listen for the truth and keep it safe. If you can vote, vote. If you can march, march. If you can help someone else stand, be the hand that steadies them. She set her palm lightly on the Constitution one last time. Not for effect, but for balance. Then she ended where she began, the message unchanged, the meaning clarified by the saying of it. American democracy survives because of people who dare to stand up when it is threatened, she said, leaving no gap for doubt. When that day comes, and it always comes, let it find you standing. The sentence settled like a cornerstone. No music rose, no coda unfolded, no gaze turned away. The message did not need a stage. It needed only the people it had named. The silence in the chamber still pulsed with the weight of her final words. But Jasmine was not finished. She leaned forward, her hands resting on the desk, her gaze locked into the camera lens as if she were speaking into every living room in America. The applause had faded. The cheers had quieted, but the tension remained alive like a wire humming under pressure. Now she shifted from warning to challenge. Her voice came low, direct me, not for senators or journalists, but for the citizens watching. If democracy survives because of people who stand up, she said, then stand up now. Her words were not lofty abstractions. They landed like instructions. Register to vote. Show up at the polls. Do not let anyone convince you your voice does not matter. She let the phrases cut one by one, each simple enough to repeat at a kitchen table. When you hear lies, call them lies. When you see corruption, shine light on it. When you feel the weight of fear pressing you into silence, remember silence is the victory of those who want to rule instead of serve. The camera zoomed in as her hand tapped the Constitution beside her. This is yours only if you claim it. She paused just long enough for the words to settle before pressing further. Talk to your neighbors, she said. Do not keep this story inside the headlines. Tell it at the dinner table. Tell it in your union hall. Tell it in your church, in your mosque, in your synagogue, in your community center. Tell it until no one can pretend they did not know what happened here. Her voice sharpened as if chiseling the words into stone. Democracy does not fail in silence. It fails when people who know the truth decide it is not their job to speak it. Her eyes scanned the chamber, but her tone never wavered. Do not wait for someone else to carry this for you. This is not a fight for politicians alone. It belongs to teachers, to veterans, to nurses, to students, to parents, to every worker who gets up each morning and decides to keep going. It belongs to the person handing you coffee at the drive-thru and the person counting your ballot in the county office. It belongs to the citizen who chooses to raise their hand when the room wants them quiet. She leaned closer to the microphone. The Constitution is a contract. Contracts mean nothing unless both sides keep them. Then her challenge grew sharper. Her rhythm faster, a cadence that dared people to rise. If you have a voice, use it. If you have a platform, share it. If you have a vote, cast it. If you have courage, lend it to someone who feels alone. Do not underestimate what happens when millions of ordinary people act like the republic is theirs because it is. The camera cut to the gallery where listeners mouth her words as if memorizing them. If you want to know how tyranny begins, it begins when the people stop showing up. If you want to know how democracy survives, it survives when you refuse to sit down. She stood taller now, one hand resting firmly on the desk, her other gesturing outward. March if you must, organize if you can, but do not ever forget that the most powerful strike you hold is your vote. Do not surrender it. Do not trade it for apathy or despair. Carry it like the weapon. It is the only weapon that builds instead of destroys. The chamber was so quiet that even the scratch of a reporter's pen could be heard. Your vote is your answer to every insult hurled at this Constitution. Use it. Her words carried the cadence of a final rallying cry. Do not be fooled by those who say the system is broken beyond repair. They want you to give up. Do not believe those who tell you democracy is weak. Democracy is only weak when the people forget it belongs to them. Do not let them write your future while you sit on the sidelines. She raised the Constitution slightly, its weight clear in her hand. Every page is waiting for your defense. She softened only slightly, her tone, becoming more intimate, as though she were speaking to a friend across a table. There will be nights when you wonder if it matters. There will be mornings when you are tired, when you think the fight is too big for you. But it matters most when you feel that way, because that is when they are counting on you to stay home, to stay quiet, to stay invisible. Do not give them what they want. She let the quiet hang for a beat. Stand up anyway. The camera caught her steady breath as she leaned back and repeated the charge. Stand up in your neighborhood. Stand up in your town. Stand up in your state. Stand up in this republic. Her voice rose again, urgent, insistent, undeniable. Stand up until the words of this Constitution are not just ink on paper but breath in your lungs. Stand up until no dynasty, no fortune, no name is greater than the people who choose their leaders. Stand up and do it now, because the moment to save democracy is always the moment you are living in. And with that, she let the silence return one last time. No spin, no flourish, no retreat. Just the echo of her challenge settling over the chamber and through the cameras into the homes of millions. The line had been drawn. The evidence had been delivered. And now the Republic waited, not for politicians, not for courts, but for the people themselves. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story.